Good morning and welcome to the Daily Tanya. Today is Wednesday, the 24th day of Adar Bays, the second Adar. Let's begin with Tzedakah. Gedola Tzedakah, Shemekareves es HaGeula. Tzedakah brings Mashiach closer. And we continue chapter 38. So we spoke yesterday about the concealment of godliness that is equal in body and soul. Just like the body, in the body we don't see the godliness. Same thing as in the soul, we don't see the godliness. That's called the hestaponim, the concealment of the countenance of Hashem. And we're not talking about the spiritual soul, talking about the vital soul, the soul that keeps us alive. And the Alter Rebbe goes to take, in today's lesson, to take it to the other way, to the other end. That in the physical things, he says in this physical world, everything, godliness is concealed everywhere equally, but in the same time, the amount of godly energy that is in different creatures, different creations, is not the same. There is certainly more energy in a brain than there is in a rock. But the same thing, the Alter Rebbe is going to explain is when we're talking about God's commandments. In God's commandments, there is a complete non-concealment. Godliness, the godliness is revealed in the commandments, because the commandments is God's will. And there is equally a revelation of God's will in the act of the mitzvah, or in the intent of the mitzvah. However, just like we said that there is a difference in the godly energy in the physical objects, there is also a difference in the revelation, how much godly energy is in the act of the mitzvah compared to the intent of the mitzvah. And when we're talking about the intent of a mitzvah, what are we talking about? We're talking about when you do a mitzvah, you can do it without kavanah, without intent. Just put on tefillin, put it on the arm and the head. You don't think much. But when you have the intent to connect to Hashem, the desire when you pray, you can just say the words, which is okay. But then you place in it, invest in it also the intent. You want to feel the connecting to Hashem. Certainly there is a greater level of godly revelation revealed in you. Further, the Alter Rebbe is also going to explain. We spoke about the division between body and soul. And in general, you're talking about a division of two. So the Alter Rebbe says it's furthermore divided into four categories. Just like there is the four categories of creation, the inanimate object, the vegetations, the animal kingdom, and the humans. So these four categories, they are also divided into two groups. So the inanimate objects and the vegetations, they belong to the group of body. And the animals and humans belong to the group of soul. Because just like by body, when we're talking about body, what are we saying? The body represents something which is it's like inanimate, or even if when it grows, it has a little more life to it, but it's very limited. It just grows. It's the same thing that grows from small to big. Not like by an animal that has already awareness, has feelings, and has all kind of different parts in the animal that develops. And obviously the same thing about human being, that they already belong to the category of the soul. And Alter Rebbe explains also that these four categories, they come as a result of the four letters of the name of Hashem. All godly energy into this world flow from the four-letter name. We speak about it in different parts in the Tanya, the Yud, the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey. The four-letter names. So the Yud represents the human. The first Hey represents the animal kingdom. And the Vav represents the vegetation. And the last Hey represents the inanimate objects. So this will be explained another time. It's not what we in the scope of today's class. So let's see what the Alter Rebbe says. So the Alter Rebbe, ki baguf hagashmi v'adoimim mamash ka'avonim v'ofer, hahore I b'bchinas tzimtzum godel asher ein kamoyim. In the physical body of a living creature, and in an absolute inanimate being, such as stones or earth, in which no life or spirituality are apparent, since they lack even the power of growth. So the ray of the divine creative powers is in a state of unparalleled contraction. There's so little amount of godly energy there. So minute is the life force within these inanimate beings that they lack even the power of growth. So this is talking about, as we said yesterday, you have in general, all creatures are concealed in a shell that conceals godliness, but the amount of energy that is in each creature is different. There's the inanimate that is completely very minute, the amount of energy. In vegetation, the ray is not so greatly contracted. The phenomenon of growth indicates the presence of something more than mere physical matter. Some degree of spirituality is in evidence. And Alter Rebbe continues and says that these categories of the creatures are divided in general into four categories. In general, all things in this world are divided into four categories: mineral, vegetable, animal, and man. And called Mendaba, the speaker. And this corresponds to the four letters of the name Havaya. This is corresponding to the four letters of the divine name, the Tetragrammaton, from which they are derived. Each of these four categories receive its vitality from one of the four letters. So again, you have the Yud, the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey. So you have the Yud, the human represents from the Yud. The Hey is the animal kingdom. The Vav represents the emotions, which is compared to So that the first Hey represents the intellect, and the Vav represents the emotions, which is represented by vegetations. Just like emotions, you can only grow emotions, but you cannot turn one emotion to another. When a child is kind, when he's small, he's still kind when he's big. It just develops. To turn a person from one emotion to another takes a lot of work. It's not an easy task. So that is in the letter Vav. And the last letter Hey is the letter that connects with the speech, which is like an inanimate object. When you speak, there is the speech represents something, but the words themselves, they don't change. The words are like an inanimate object. So this is the source of the 4 categories of creations. Okay, so now the Alter Rebbe continues and says that just like when we're talking about the physical objects, there is no comparison between the godly energy in an inanimate object compared to the inanimate and vegetation object, which belong to the group of body. You cannot compare that light to the light that we have in the animal and the human. The same thing is going to explain is the difference between the act of a mitzvah and the kavana, the intent of the mitzvah. Continues the Alter Rebbe. וכמוי שאין ערך ודמיון העורב והמשוחס החי שבדוימם צומח. לעורב והמשוחס החייס המלובשת בחי ומדבר. Now, just as the illumination and flow of vitality found in the mineral and vegetable categories, they bear no comparison or likeness to the illumination and flow of vitality clothed in animal and man, since in the latter 2 categories it is clearly apparent that they are alive. You see the movements, you see the passion, you see so much life you see in animals and humans. אף שבכולם אור אחד שווה בבחינת אסתר פנים ומלובש בלבוש אחד בכולם שהוא לבוש נויגה. Although in all 4 categories the divine animating light is the same in terms of concealment of countenance, meaning in all 4 categories the inner aspect of the divine light is concealed equally. And in all 4 categories, the light is clothed in the same garment, namely the garment of the veil of Noiga. Hence, in none of these categories is it apparent that their vitality is actually godliness. Yet, despite this quality, the vitality of the inanimate beings and plants is incomparable to that of animals and men. So what are we saying again? So we're saying on the one hand, God's concealment is equal in all. You don't feel godliness, you don't see godliness. But the godly energy, the amount, so to speak, the quantity of the energy is certainly not the same in each of these categories. The same thing, it says the Alter Rebbe, when we're talking about the godliness that is in the mitzvahs. There, we explained in the previous chapters, there is no concealment of God. God's will is revealed. The inner will of God expresses in His commandments. So when we do a mitzvah, when we take the matzah for Passover, and we eat it, and by the Seder night, we fulfill God's will. So that act of eating the matzah is a complete revelation of godliness, meaning the God's will is there without any concealment. It's not like He's creating rocks so we can take the rocks and turn to a house and live in the house, because ultimately it leads you to do something good. That here in the act of the mitzvah itself is the light, drawing Hashem's light without any concealment. And in this sense, there is no difference between doing the act of the mitzvah or the kavanah, the intent, why we do the mitzvah. Equally, Hashem wants us to do the act, and Hashem wants us to have the intent. And so the drawing of God's light is equally in the act and in the mitzvah. However, there is a difference of how much it is revealed, how much of the godliness is sensed. In the kavanah of the mitzvah, when you do a mitzvah with intent, you want to connect and you think about it, and it leads you to a desire to connect to Hashem. And certainly godliness is revealed in you in a greater way than it is in simple, dry act of doing something without even thinking. So that's what Alter Rebbe says. Kach ein erch v'dimyon klal bein ha'orez v'amshochas oirin soif baruch hu, shu pnimius retzonos baruch bli hester panim levush klal. Similarly, there is no comparison or likeness between the illumination and flow of the blessed Ein Sof light, meaning the inner aspect of His will, without concealment of countenance and with no garment whatsoever. Amarim melubeshes b'mitzvos ma'asiyos mamish, v'chein b'mitzvos atlos b'dibur u'b'tisvosayim bli kavanah shu nechshav k'ma'aseh mamish k'nizka l'el. As it radiates and is clothed within the mitzvahs consisting of action, whether actual action or mitzvahs performed through speech and verbal articulation, which is regarded as actual action, as mentioned above, when performed without kavanah. So the illumination of the Ein Sof found in these mitzvahs bears no likeness or comparison with the superior illumination and flow of the blessed Ein Sof, radiating and clothed in the kavanah of the mitzvahs of action. And what is the kavanah? When doing a mitzvah with kavanah, when you pray with kavanah, you can pray just with the meaning, understanding what you're saying, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about kavanah to connect, the intent to connect to Hashem through doing the mitzvah or through this prayer. Meaning man's intention to attach himself to God by fulfilling His will, as expressed in the mitzvahs, since He and His will are one. Hashem and His will are one. Unlike by humans, there is us and there is what we want. God and His desire, His will, is one thing. So when you intend to connect to Hashem by doing His will, you're connecting to Hashem Himself. Similarly, with regard to kavanah in prayer, the recital of the Shema and its blessings, and in other blessings, where through one's kavanah in them, he attaches his thought and intellect to God. So that's what the Alter Rebbe concludes today. Tomorrow we're going to continue in this further explaining this concept. But what is the takeaway today? Is that when we do a mitzvah, let's invest a little more, not just doing it dry. Let's invest a little more to have the kavanah, to understand why we do the mitzvah. We do the mitzvah to connect to Hashem. And the more we have the kavanah in the mitzvah, the more light we bring upon ourselves and upon the world, which leads to the light of the coming of Mashiach very soon. Amen. A wonderful day. We'll see you tomorrow. B'ezrat Hashem.